traveling in Southeast Asia for 3 months of the winter quarter, I have created 6 principles of practice that I plan to use going forward, and I've combined it all into a book. But I'll get into all of that in just a little bit. First, I kind of want to take you back to the question that I've been working with, which is just, how have we made such a mess of the world, and is there really anything that we can do to fix it? So, to try and probe away at this question, I've been studying education and looking at different epistemologies, trying to understand humanity. Kind of a hard task. But I've had this long process of planning my trip, lots of reading and research, trying to understand what I'm placing myself into, and then the actual traveling that I did and the creation of my book. And then also just trying to make sense of all my experiences, and then finally creating these principles. So just to kind of explain the outline of the book, it's basically just a chronological look at my travels through Thailand, Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam. And I share my experiences through short stories, photo essays, and place profiles, and then I use the principles as themes for each segment of my journey. So just to give you some examples, this is a place profile of Chiang Mai, some photo essays. Sorry, I don't have a lot of time for you. This is a short story, and then I use these boxes to describe my principles. So why principles? Well, as Gandhi said, humans are imperfect. We're incapable of practicing things to perfection. But what we can do is use principles to set an ideal of perfection. And so that's what I aim to do, is to set this ideal for me going forward of what I'm striving towards. And so I'm going to go through each principle, and I'm going to kind of take you along the journey of how I've developed them. So really it all started for me when I joined CEP. It was finally a place where I was able to have academic freedom and the ability to direct my own learning and to direct my own education. As Frere would suggest, education can lead either down a path towards conformity or down a path towards freedom. And when you take that path towards freedom, that's when you're given the ability to transform your world. So in trying to answer my question, this is really important. I need to have that if I have any hope at solving these problems that we face globally. So I took my freedom and I flew off to Thailand at the end of December. And when I got there, it was kind of sensory overload, you might say. I'd never been to Asia before. It's a completely new culture, new climate, new language, and that's where I really learned to be mindful. Mindfulness is a concept that's taken from Buddhism. Thailand is a Buddhist country. And what it is just an alert use of all of your senses so that you're really able to take in the present moment and understand your reality. And part of my reality while I was in Thailand was getting to go along to rescue Lucky, who's this lovely elephant here. And she's actually blind. She was in the circus for many years, but she's now living peacefully in a sanctuary outside of Chiang Mai where I got to volunteer. And a really cool thing about elephants is that they have sensors on the pads of their feet that allow them to absorb sound vibrations from the ground. It's a way that they can communicate to each other. And I'm sure that Lucky here was experiencing some sensory overload herself when we first got her back to the park, because immediately she was swarmed by a small herd of elephants, and they just came around to inspect her and embrace her. And that just sort of taught me another side to mindfulness, that it's not just using our own 5 senses, but seeing the limitations to that. Whatever is going on between these elephants is a mystery to me, and I'm sure all of you too. So the next part of my journey was going to Laos, and that's where I got to learn and really experience the power of dialogue. And the people who really helped me learn about this were my friends Tom and Rochelle, who I met while traveling and spent a large chunk of time with. And when they weren't napping, which was actually most of the time, we were usually looking out at beautiful places like this. This is the Mekong River in southern Laos, and we just kind of got to get into these really deep, open, free conversations. And we would talk about anything. I remember one day we were walking down the street and Tom kind of stopped dead in his tracks, and he looked at us with this really serious expression and he said, "Have we talked about religion yet?" And we were like, no, but we will. We'll get there. And this, being able to engage in the dialogue with them was really profound. And as David Bohm, who's a theoretical physicist, would suggest, dialogue is actually one of the main tools that we have trying to address and solve these problems. So for me, as a principal, dialogue stand is that ideal form of communication when I'm trying to work with other people. The next stop on my journey was Cambodia, and it was actually pretty difficult for me to find a word to articulate what it was that I learned in Cambodia. And I've landed on luminance, which is actually a technical term. It's the photometric measurement for the intensity of light. That's actually a pretty perfect definition for what I'm getting at, though, because if you think about the brightness of the sun and the light that it casts, and then also think about what happens when that light is blocked. It casts a shadow. It creates darkness. Well, it's the same thing if you think about within us. We all have an inner light, you might say. But when that light is blocked, it can also cast darkness out into the world. And the most obvious example of this in Cambodia comes from this man in the middle here, and his name's Pol Pot. You might be familiar with him. He was the leader of the Khmer Rouge and the dictator of Cambodia in the late 1970s. And during his regime, they lost about a quarter of the population in Cambodia, around 2 million people. And with such a devastating and dark period in the country's recent history, it was so remarkable for me to be able to go and have experiences like the one that I did in this park with these children. I stopped to play with these puppies because I'm kind of a sucker for like cute fuzzy things. In exchange for letting me play with the puppies, I let the boys play with my camera, and these were some pictures that they took. And once I got bored with the camera, I convinced them to teach me to count to 10 in Khmer, which is the local language. And as I kind of fumbled through and was really struggling, a little crowd gathered, and I gained a few more teachers, some teenage boys and an older woman, and they all looked on so eager and so patient, and I was really struggling on number 4, Om, which I'm probably still saying wrong, but they were all so proud when I was finally able to count to 10 on my own. I was pretty proud of myself too. But, it was just these kinds of things that kept happening to me. This woman just handed me her baby, no questions asked. This little boy was one of the cheekiest kids I've ever met in my entire life, and he only had one arm. These girls shared quite the laugh after accidentally banging that baby's head against the truck that I was in. They just had such light and luminance. And for me, I just always want to remember that and the love that they shared with me. Martin Luther King said, "Darkness cannot drive out darkness, only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate, only love can do that." And so as a principle, luminance is really important to me. Finally, I went to Vietnam, and that's where it kind of all connected for me, you might say. I was only in the country for 12 days, but I spent most of my time in this small fishing village outside of Ha Long Bay City called Van Dan, which, as you can see, is extremely beautiful. It's in the archipelago. It's amazing. But even more amazing were the people that I met there. This woman in the pink, after Tom stopped her on her morning walk to take her portrait, she came up to me. We didn't say a word, and she just grabbed my hand and pulled me into her house. Fed us breakfast, woke up her son so he could come down and speak English with us. And this just happened over and over and over again. And I couldn't really figure out why people were so nice or so interested in us. Part of me thought it was because of how tall Tom was. They were very interested in us, but people were also really interested in this necklace that Tom always wore. And it's called a clue. And starting from the inner world circle, it stands for consciousness, life, earth, and universe. And it's all made of one piece of metal that's just coiled around. So if you get that everything is connected, then you have a clue. And one person who definitely had a clue was Con, the guy in the baseball cap, who we befriended while we were in Vietnam. And it pretty much fell exactly in line with his life philosophy, which was, we are one. And he said it multiple times a day. But the really great thing about Ton was that he really lives his philosophy. This guy over here is one of his employees, who he referred to all as his brothers, because they were part of his family. And when I think about Ton and about oneness, it's really important in my practice for me to be reminded that I'm not a separate entity from you or you or you, but all of us are just a piece of this greater whole. And my last day in Vietnam was pretty stressful. I was riding through acid rain on the back of a motorbike for 3 hours. I got sick. I missed my first flight. So by the time I got back, or finally got on my plane to Seattle, I was kind of a wreck. But that's when I was able to really start reflecting on all these experiences that I had. And in the past month, I've been able to continue doing that as I've been making my book, And really, I don't believe that you can have practice that's not accompanied by reflection. That's something that CEP has taught me, and it's something that I've learned going through this process. So going forward, like I said, I want these principles to guide me. It's a very personal thing. I developed them out of my personal experiences. But I also believe that they're very applicable in a field that I'm very passionate about, which is education reform. And this tuk-tuk over here says school is the answer, but I would make a minor edit and say education is the answer. As we talked about earlier, if you take the path of education towards freedom, that's when you get that power to make those positive changes that we need. So I really believe that that is possible. In the words of Einstein, learn from yesterday, live for today, hope for tomorrow. So there aren't any guarantees that what we do is going to make a difference. At least I haven't found any. But what we can do is act with the hope that our actions are going to influence change and are going to work towards solving these problems that we're faced with. Thank you so much for listening. Does anyone have any questions?